everybody. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. How are you? How are you doing with all the social distancing? If you're in a state or a town that is in full tilt lockdown, how are you doing? How are we all coming through? It's the very end of April of 2020. Many of us have been in self-quarantine or in a shelter-in-place or lockdown state since really some people have been that way since the middle of March. So we're going to be rolling into January, February, March, April, going to be coming into May. And we in the state of Montana opened for business, certain businesses. They're opening in waves here in Montana because we have such a small population base that we're opening in waves, and obviously restaurants and bars aren't open. However, certain businesses have been open for a week, and the next phase, I believe, is in 2 weeks. So I think that's around, May 7th, where they're going to be opening up restaurants and bars and, of course, gyms and whatnot. And we have had people doing takeout from restaurants all over the place here in Billings. This has just been a matter of making sure that people are not interfacing with one another because we don't want to spread this virus to the point that people are just suffering, underneath of just hideous and awful things. So here we are, and what a collective consciousness experiment. And it's been fascinating to watch how people respond under pressure. And of course, we saw just all sorts of protests erupt over the last couple of weeks that people's civil liberties were being taken away and all these things. And it's important to recognize that people are going to exhibit their fear in different ways. And not all fear is exhibited in the same way. It's just not. So I found it so intriguing because the lesson and the message of this COVID-19 experience is about coming into being with ourselves, coming back into resonation with Mother Earth, and really, truly deciding how we're going to bring our gifts and talents out to the world. And this has involved needing to, really wiggle and pop in certain ways that we normally wouldn't. Financially, I know a lot of people out there have applied for the PPP loans and for the SBA loans, and many people are receiving those loans. Many people are receiving just the individual personal stimulus from the government. I had to laugh. Here in Montana, my wife and I and my daughter, we really haven't been going out of the house much. I mean, except to work in the yard here or there, or go to the grocery store, or when they open things up. We did make a quick trip to Lowe's to buy some stuff that a good friend of ours could build a fountain out of in the side yard because we're spending so much more time at the house. And so we would really want, the environment and everything to be really lovely and exciting and beautiful and whatnot. So here we are, doing our thing. And it's been really fabulous, actually, to be home. And again, I'm very blessed because I work on the phone quite a bit, and I've had more clients want Skype readings or Zoom readings or any of that. And unfortunately, because of the frequency that these angels come through on, if you will, that really does interfere with the amount of bandwidth that's needed for video on Skype or on Zoom. And sometimes it even gets in the way, this angelic resonance when I'm channeling. Sometimes that even gets in the way when we're shooting Road Angel. I mean, I've killed the lav packs, those lavs that you see, the microphones that are pinned onto somebody's jacket or whatnot. And I've killed the batteries in those before. Not that I did, but the energy coming through me just drains them out. So, I mean, we're all making adjustments and wiggling in whatever way possible we can. And it's taking a minute to recognize what is our priority in this new world. I mean, this is a huge part of what we're here to learn is over these many podcasts I've been mentioning, we've got to just be in yourself, figure out what the world is asking you to bring forward that perhaps maybe you haven't, because for whatever reason you've decided, oh, that's not a good idea. Yet at this time frame, in this feminine time frame, I mean, we are really being asked to bring this forward. It's a big deal. So hopefully many of you out there have used this time before we've tried to restart the machine, which is, I'll get into that in a minute about whether that's a good idea or not. However, trying to figure out who we are before we, quote, go back to normal. And, those of you that follow these angelic messages, you follow the work that I put out, you follow the podcast, we're not going to go back to normal. There is no normal to go back to. Normal was super duper 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 broken. So hopefully, even though we do need to get some income coming through the house, we need to put some groceries on the pantry shelf. I get it. We need to make sure that we're providing for our families. That being said, the system was unbelievably broken. And there's going to be a huge push. Let's see. What are we at here? Okay, the very end of April. There's going to be a big push in May, June, especially for everything just to get back the way it was, and let's get back in this saddle. The problem with getting back in the saddle, gang, is that we are going to have a break in when this coronavirus goes away and flares up again. And obviously, we're going into the summer seasons. This virus doesn't do well in humidity, and it doesn't do well in heat. And it can kind of get killed and, lay dormant in places and people. And then once the climate is correct for it, it's a little more cool and a little less humid, then that virus takes off again. So as I look down the timelines, I'm looking at October-ish, end of September, October-ish, even the beginning of November, depending on the parts of the country people are in, where this virus, has an opportunity to kind of get up and running again if it's going to do it. Those are the windows of time that, especially October, that I see coming in. And some things that we're not factoring in as we've flattened the curve, we've done a great job with that. Some of the things we're not factoring in is that some folks have just chosen not to participate in the quarantine. And we out here in Montana, we have a really interesting cross-section of needs in this state. And one of the reasons I really enjoy living here is because you don't have the insular echo chamber of having enough people to be able to build a neighborhood or a community or whatever of everybody who completely holds your opinion, and that is all. Because we just don't have enough people, right? So in Montana, you have a lot of people who have varying belief systems. And I really feel like Montana is a fascinating cross-section of the entire nation. And one of the things I like about living in Billings is that I'm a person who appreciates diversity as much as I love being around like-minded people and like-minded communities, and I do love that. I get a little bit weirded out if everybody is my clone in my community. Like I start to get weird. I'm thinking, wow, my soul is not learning a lot by surrounding myself in walking mirrors. This is not healthy. So I'm somebody who really appreciates healthy alternatives. I'm not saying I want to live next door to an angry racist who wants to burn my house down every 5 seconds because they're also homophobic. I'm not saying that. Yet I'm saying that I really think that we're supposed to be a diverse population because there's balance in all things and there's balance in all perspective. And if we only see the world through one giant perspective that's too limiting, then we're going to not be seeing a lot of the finer points that need attended to, right? So in Montana, and in which it's a myth, by the way, when you see Montana on the political map, they will make Montana a red state. They will say, Trump won Montana by 20 points, blah, blah, blah. Montana is actually a purple state. And the fact that they want to call it a red state just because of the 2016 presidential election is inaccurate. We have a Democratic governor. One of our 2 senators is a Democratic senator. And so we've got basically a Republican senator, and we only have 1 person in the House of Representatives because we don't have a very large population base. We're the 4th largest state in the union, and we just broke 1 million people. I mean, so we have a pretty small population base. We're not as small as Wyoming. Wyoming, landmass-wise, is not nearly as large as we are, yet they only have almost 400,000 people in the entire state. Yeah, Wyoming. God bless you guys in Wyoming. Wow, it's rough down there. You guys make Montana look like Los Angeles. Seriously. So when I look at this and I look at the needs that Montana has had and the fact that we are this purple state and a lot of the major cities in Montana are, quote, blue cities. My city of Billings is the largest in the whole state, and it's a purple state. It's pretty much split right down the middle between conservative voters and liberal voters. And the point I'm making is not to talk about Montana to death. The point I'm making is that living here is fascinating because it really gives you a bit of a pulse for, we're a microcosm for a lot of different beliefs. Let's put it to you that way. We have super, super progressive people here. We have some seriously scary backwards, like Freeman, lynch them up kind of people out in the backcountry here. There's everybody here. And the main rule in Montana is be a good neighbor. Don't be obnoxious in the bar. Don't steal my gun, my land, or my cattle, or my wife. And be a generally decent human. And other than that, just live your life. Just be a kind person and be a good neighbor. And don't take more than is yours out of the resources in the land, and we'll be fine. They call it the live and let live culture. And so it's been fascinating to see how we've been responding to COVID-19 in the live and let live culture, because there are quite a number of people here in Montana who live in the outlying areas. Some of these counties in Montana have never had one instance of COVID-19 because they don't have enough people who ever leave the ranch. Now, I want you to think about this a minute. There are people in the eastern part of Montana that their entire life is living on the ranch. And they have food brought in or shipped in. Maybe once every 3 months they go to Costco. I mean, these are people whose lifestyle is self-isolating. So the governor of Montana, when the governor opened up the state, I was not happy because in my city, there's a lot of people running around acting like nothing's happening. And there are a lot of people being conscientious. Yet I thought, oh God, everybody gets out among them. We've got a whole population base here and across the United States who has thought that this entire quarantine is an idiotic thing to do. So they're all running around, and who knows if they're passing the coronavirus or not? Who knows if they are asymptomatic or not? They're now saying that a person can contract the coronavirus more than one time because we're not building immunity up to it. So you might recover and get it again. Good times. Party in 2020. So, I mean, it's just a weird mentality that, well, if I die, who cares? There seems to be lacking that consciousness of, oh, wow, well, I could give it to somebody else. That little piece is missing there. So the reason I'm going into this is because I'm talking today about you do you, man. I mean, I'm talking today about the consciousness that goes into this COVID-19 experiment. And again, in Billings, we're a purple city in a purple state, where there are other cities in this state that definitely are red or definitely are blue. Bozeman is blue, Butte is blue, Missoula is blue. I think Great Falls is purple like we are, but the big cities aren't red. And there's tons of small towns, red as you can get here. So it's very interesting for me to watch the different consciousness fly around. Now, I know a lot of people who've come in from outlying areas in the state, and they're wearing masks and gloves, and they're being very conscientious because they don't want to take it back out to the ranch and give it to everybody out there. Yet, everybody right now, gang, has a role to play. And this is one of the bits, just the little bits of fascinating insight that I've been given during this time frame. And it's not to say that I understand how people are decrying having their quote, oh, my rights are taken away and blah. I think we all know how I feel about that. I think that's crazy. However, that's my lens to look at that and say, wow, this is crazy. And so it's important that as we go forward in this COVID-19 experience, and it's not over yet, we're going to have another round of this stuff. And it's also going to come out at the same time the flu is coming out, because guess what cold and flu season is? The fall, the winter. So people are going to be getting the flu. And they can also it's not like you get one or the other. COVID-19 kind of does its own thing. And it doesn't care if you have the flu or not. It can infect you while you have the flu. So then you get this double whammy, and who knows what that's going to do necessarily to the body. And I'm not trying to sound like doom and gloom Debbie over here. It's just to point out that this idea that we're going back to normal and we're all finished with this and this is through and blah. The first round of this social isolation was a test run, not only for a weirder I'll just call it a weirder. I'm not going to say it's going to be worse. I'm just going to say it's going to be a weirder burst out of COVID-19, yet also some other pandemic-y stuff in about 8-10 years. So right now, though, let's focus on this. So right now, we're looking at having to choose grace when dealing with people who may not at all in any way share our belief system in what is appropriate socially. And again, if we can find that place of grace for all of us struggling with fear in different ways, this next section coming up in, say, October-ish, give or take some change there, will go far easier. And it's easier to socially isolate also if you're in a northern state and the snow is coming and nobody wants to be outside in that. It's gross. Not unless you ski or snowshoe or something like that. And skiing is naturally a socially distanced type of thing to do up on the hill. Yet when we talk about you being you or you do you, there's a lot of people who are still not going to get the memo, gang. When COVID comes up again, and it will, and it is getting doubled up with the flu, and we're seeing far greater illness to a far greater degree, there are still going to be people who cannot handle that information. And there's still going to be people saying, it's still a conspiracy. It's not a big deal. People die of the flu. Who cares? Because what I've been shown is that people their psyches can only handle what they can handle, gang. And it's very, very fascinating that it wasn't the left out there protesting, saying, our rights are being destroyed. We need to be able to get out of the house. And lefties, we love to protest, right? It's like an Olympic sport for we lefties. We get our bandanas on and we have sign making parties and somebody brings really great food and we listen to really great music and we get all excited. We tie-dye our shirts. And for the left, it's almost a social occasion to prepare for the march. And then we all get together and we have our unified voice. And really, a lot of times, that's kind of where it goes. You have your march, you put that energy out into the universe, you let your grievance be known, and you may save your sign for next time, but, you go home. Maybe some people work on grassroots campaigns, whatever. But really, overall, the left, we march and we leave, right? So it was interesting to see the, quote, right march this time and why they were marching. And I was fascinated because when I surveyed these groups of people, yes, there was deep fears that maybe something was going on, and this is such a QAnon thing. There was something going on with the deep state starting to take our rights away, and like Nazi Germany, it was starting here, but it was going to end there. Yet when I surveyed the hearts of the people in these protests who really believed with their heart of hearts that, by God, they needed a haircut. And this government is just keeping them from looking their best, by God. What was under that was a loss of control. It was a fear that their control over their lives was gone. And then under that layer, when I went underneath of it, I felt this, it was actually, I had a lot of empathy all of a sudden for these folks who were going through this because I stumbled upon a sub-basement in a lot of these people, not all of them, but a lot of them, that had been really carefully hidden under the cellar floorboards in their emotionality. And that was this fear that they had just kind of settled in their life and settled into autopilot or something that was the easiest for them. And the more they sat there at home and the more they stared at their spouse and the more they looked at their hair growing out and their fat getting on their gut and the hair growing on their legs for those of us who are wax aficionados. And the whole thing and the subfloor caved in. And it's like it was too much for many of these folks to have to sit still in their life and look at what they had built. Because you take away the opportunity to run with consumerism. I mean, consumerism is a grand distraction, gang. It is awesome. You know, you take $5 and go get a beer, right? Or you take $50 and go get a pair of shoes and you shop and it takes you out of the house and it gets all those yummy hunter-gatherer chemicals going on. You take $5,000 and you go buy a motorcycle. You know, I mean, the list goes on. And a lot of times for people, the larger the purchase, the bigger the serotonin rush is. So I'm not saying that these folks who are protesting on the right hate their lives, yet what I found resoundingly inside of them was they just didn't know, many of them didn't know what the hell to do with themselves if somebody took away their rule book. I mean, if somebody took away their, okay, you get up on Sunday, you go to church, then you go to the biker meeting, then you go home and do Boy Scouts, then you this, then you that, then you do that. You take the structure and the routine and the external training wheels off of their lives. And there was this feeling of a loss of control that I was psychically and empathically pulling out of a lot of these people that was fueling this fear that, oh my God, my rights are going to be taken away and this is the way everyday life is going to be. Because I'll tell you, there was only a handful. When I felt into those protesters, there was really only a handful of them that were in some way Bill of Rights purists that maybe were holdovers from 1776 or something, and this is just their kink to rally against what they think rights are. Yet that was such a minority of this group. And I'm not saying that the left doesn't have their fears, gang. Please understand that. I'm saying of the people who chose to participate, the snips that were taken on the news, those were the snips that I had an opportunity to metaphysically, to psychically, to empathically, if you want to use the word scan or evaluate or look into. And that's what I did. So again, it's fascinating to see that this group of people who might consider themselves, quote, more traditional, rely so much on the structure that's outside of them that if that structure begins to collapse in any way, there is such a fear that they will not be able to define themselves or their life that they march. And we on the left, we're kind of the other way. We're like, hey, let's just kind of let it go loosey-goosey and see what we can make with some big groups of clay and let's have everybody be involved. And quite honestly, sometimes that's a little unrealistic, but that's where we go, right? And then we do a drum circle and somebody's making vegan burritos and there's some weed over there. And then we're just back to the big party. So no, I am not taking away from the important political work that folks do on the left, gang. So let's not get too bunchy about that comment. I'm simply saying that if we look at why people march, this marching of the right, which the right like never marches, that's super weird. The marching of the right was about the removal of external identity and what they thought to be true. So what I began to recognize is, okay, now I would march if all of a sudden they outlawed people being black in America. I would march like crazy because I would see that as threatening my structure that I knew to be true. Yet, I think I was fascinated by the fact that a lot of the structure that these folks were freaked out about disappearing was shopping opportunities and effing haircuts and, well, I want to sit in the park. And all of a sudden, I saw this fear come out of these folks. I mean, hey, everybody's fearful on some level. So I'm not saying only the right is fearful. Yet, gang, the fear of change, the fear of evolution, fear that they won't be able to define themselves without these little external things they do every day. And it was just, it made me sad. It made me sad for a lot of these people. Now, obviously, not everybody, some of those people were just marching to get the hell out of the house. That's the truth. Yet, when I psychically looked into it and I saw the amount of fear, you know, it was fascinating to me because that you hear a lot of complaint from the right about the left being hateful and fearful and what's our problem and whatever. And it hit me like a ton of bricks when I saw Just the footage I saw, and I'm sure there had to have been some folks of some ethnic group in these protests. Yet, it's probably our news media that angles everything in a certain way. Yet every single crowd I was looking at was full of white people. And these were hundreds and hundreds of white faces. Now, who knows what ethnicity those people really are? But they appeared to be Caucasian. And I remember reading some Facebook posts from some friends of mine who consider themselves more conservative during, the whole Trump thing and all these other things going on. And they would say, racism is dead. And I don't know why you're all on the left are so upset about things. There's nothing to be upset about. And it hit me like a ton of bricks as I'm looking at this sea of thousands of white people in these photographs, hundreds of white people, that if I'm white and heterosexual in America and I'm middle class, then it is more likely that if I live a more traditional lifestyle, even if I'm a little bit of an outlaw on my Harley or whatever, yet if I live a little more of a traditional lifestyle, I don't have a whole lot to fear there except for maybe financial hiccups. My reality as a Caucasian heterosexual person in America who happens to be Christian, let's throw that in there, because I don't want to just lump every Caucasian heterosexual together, gang. I'm not saying that. I'm saying looking at these groups of very conservative protesters, I saw a very particular demographic there. And those folks that have been telling me, and I'm just tying this to my Facebook conversations, who've been telling me, hey, there's nothing to be afraid of. Why are you afraid of this virus? We're so well taken care of under this presidential administration. I don't understand why you think things are bad. Well, if I was that traditional, heterosexual, very Christian, more conservative person, then hell, everything be coming up roses right now, except for the fact that I can't get my damn hair cut or go to the park. And it was just the reason I went through this whole thing to talk about the state of Montana and all of this to build up what I felt psychically in these protests and to break it down demographically to a degree, again, just for what I could see. And there could have been huge packs of African-American people, Latina people, Latinos that the news just didn't take pictures of because, However, I couldn't help but thinking, yeah, this is a privileged white person problem to go out and march about this stuff. And I'm a white person. So, hey, I'm a gay white person, but I'm a white person, so whatever. Yet it made me realize that these angels were giving me some insight on all of this. If we can go into places of compassion with people, and I've talked a little about this, but let's get to the you do you point. We're going to keep barreling forward, gang, in some lessons that are going to get your full dang attention. I mean, straight up. And if we continue to polarize and to be tribalistic about, well, my side thinks this and your side thinks that, we're going to lose the whole lesson here that there is no side. There is no side. There is action that supports the wealth and the health and the spiritual well-being of the many, and there is action that does not. Okay? And neither one of those actions are owned by one group or another. None of these actions are evil or non-evil, or are good or better. We simply have a way that will get us through a very tight strait. Like pretend we're a ship captain right now, and we're on the bow of a 3-masted sail ship, like the Nina, the Pinta, or the Santa Maria, and we're going across as careless colonizers who are naive in what we're doing because we're kind of drunk on our own consumer avarice, right? So we're sailing this ship, and there's kind of one way, when we got an armada behind us, okay? And there's really only one way to get through this strait or this pass of water that has jaggedy rocks on either side. We've got to go right up the middle. Now, if we veer to the right, we crash on the rocks. If we veer to the left, we crash on the rocks. We got to go right up the middle. And some of these ship captains are not comfortable going up the middle. That to them defies every chart they've ever drawn. Yet in this instance, it's about making sure you can find the water that's the most buoyant for the most boats. Period. So when I look ahead and I see the you do you aspect of this, there will be people who are just going to do what they're going to do. There are going to be people who, on the second wave of this, we're going to get right back out and hoard again and blah, blah. And at least the stores are going to be a little more prepared this time around for all of that. Yet, instead of coming into a place of maybe being hateful with somebody or thinking that person is stupid or whatever, what was shown to me is that each person in the cast called humanity right now is playing a pretty specific role so that the whole can learn. So, let's think about that iconic photo, that now iconic photo of the nurse in Denver standing in the crosswalk with his arms crossed and a classic big old white SUV American car. I don't know what kind it was. I don't know if it was a Cadillac. I don't know if it was a GMC, but it was just this honking American white SUV, right? And this woman's hanging out the side with her protest sign, and she's yelling at the nurse, saying, "Go back to China. This is not a communist country." And it was just, I remember looking at that thinking, well, if we're not going to get it off that visual, I don't know what it is. And I'm not making fun of the woman who's in the truck. Okay, she is a product of her own spiritual path. She is a product of her own belief systems. Yet I looked at that and I thought, well, there it is. There is the perfect photograph of what that American appetite for stuff looks like. And so as we go forward into this, and again, this is the you do you aspect of all of this, as we go forward, recognizing that there will be people who will not be able to let go of their external world. Just period. They can't do it. Who the hell are they if they're not the God-fearing, gun-toting whatever? Who the heck are they if they're not somebody's wife with a million kids and they're going to church? Who are they if they're not these people? Because they've been taught that the world is forged on the outside of them, and that is how they measure their value a lot of times in that group. And I'm saying they, and that's pretty generalized and kind of gross sounding. However, I've noted that folks who adhere to those social principles kind of fall apart if you mess with their structure. Now, we're also going to see on the far left this big snapback of people who are violently upset that people are ignoring the second quarantine round and taking some pretty hefty actions. And it's important to remember that, it's one thing to be a nurse standing in a crosswalk and you're not touching anybody and you're just stopping traffic. Whenever we resort to any kind of violence whatsoever, this is what breaks us down. And the more scarce resources become, the less rational human beings become, because we're still buying into this bizarre notion that there's not enough to go around because we came out of the old world that restricts resources in order to control people, right? So there's a reason that we're super paranoid and act ridiculously and violently sometimes. However, if we can just adopt the, hey man, you do you sort of attitude going through this summer and going into this next phase with this illness, we're going to get off a little better than if we start stalemating off with one another about who's doing this right and who's doing it wrong. I will go on record as a person who has family in the medical field as doctors, physician's assistants, nurses, that you don't want to get sick with this bug. It's disgusting. You should see the intubation tubes they pull out of people. For those of you that are my age, that are 50 and in that 40 to 50, maybe even late 30s, you may remember a toy called green slime. Remember that? It was awesome. Then they had slime with eyeballs. Oh God, I was such a tomboy. I love that. Anyway, I want you to think about the slime toy. And it literally, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it was this goo that was literally the consistency of non-sticky snot. And actually, it was a failed adhesive. It was supposed to be an adhesive, but it never gelled up. So they threw neon green food coloring in it. God knows how that affected we who grew up in the 70s. We're probably half crazy because of that. Who knows what was in it? However, they put this food coloring in and they sold it in a garbage can. And you basically just poured it out on your hands and squished it through your fingers and poured it on the table to gross out your mom. And then when you were done, you scooped it back into the garbage can. And eventually your green slime would die, right? Because it would start picking up, you're a kid, so it's got like sand in it. And there's like a dead beetle and a marble and somebody's toenail from the bathroom. I mean, it gets so gross that your mom eventually would just throw it out. She'd be like, this is a health hazard. And that was her excuse to do your just hallowed slime in. However, green slime, it was gross. When you take these intubation tubes out of people's lungs, and these nurses that have been showing people what this looks like, a normal intubation tube is kind of wet and a little mucusy, but it's not super bad. You have to kind of really look at it hard. The ones that have been pulled out of a COVID-19 victim look literally like somebody just poured a layer of green slime right on the tray. It looked like set dressing. But there's so much thick mucus in people's lungs that it literally looks fake. It looks like green slime. So when I talk about you do you, I want you to understand that Danielle Egnew, on a personal level, thinks it's just jackass to go out there and flirt with this particular virus based upon not only what I've seen psychically through the ethers, but also my brain and speaking with medical professionals that I know and trust and love. And no one in my family who is a medical professional, especially the person who is a doctor, is a histrionic person. She's not. In fact, my stepmom is the most chill dill pickle you're ever going to find, and she avoids drama like crazy, and if it's too weird, she walks away, and just the facts, ma'am, or whatever. And she had some very strong opinions about the nature of this bug and what it was going to do. And I was a little surprised because Ms. Chill Dill Pickle wasn't so chill. And it was like, yeah, this is really bad. So, which I knew just from looking through the ethers anyway, but it's interesting to hear a doctor say that. So again, I'm not here to labor COVID-19. I'm here to say that me as a person, that's my lens, is that this is a horrible idea to defy quarantines and get out there and be careless and whatnot. And as we open up business, there's going to be all kinds of people who never quarantined mixed with all the people who did quarantine. And a lot of those folks are asymptomatic, and we're just going to pass this bug around. And then we're going to hit the fall and cold season, and people are going to be trying to get a clue about why they don't feel well. Another thing that we're not taking into, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is that you do you really needs to be our mantra going into this second phase of weirdness, because everybody has a different role to play. And I'm going to do my part. I'm going to be responsible for myself. My family is going to do what we can. My wife owns a fitness center, Kinesi Coaching Studios here in Billings, Montana. And she's going to do what she can to keep her clients safe. She may not even open the day that the second wave opens. She's not really feeling it. She wants to keep her people safe. Yet we all, if we can, come to a place of allowing people their space. Then we don't have things like protests that happen. And we stay out of groupthink that way. And groupthink can get really dangerous on any side. You know, mobs with pitchforks and torches are easy to rile up because individuals no longer feel individual accountability. They become part of that empathic mob consciousness that has only its job in that moment, which is to do whatever they're there to do. So you do you. You do you, man. You know, just basically means that unless somebody is directly harming someone, and we need to run interference, obviously, our main job is going to be how do we brighten the corner where we're at and create the peace that we want to see coming into the world. And this is really hard for, especially we in America, that we're like a super insecure culture. We are. You know, when I went to Scotland and Italy, I was looking at these ancient cultures, and everybody's just like, yeah, we do what we do. In America, it's almost like if we don't have a lot of people following us or agreeing with us, then by God, we must be wrong. I mean, I swear to God, the way we've been programmed in this country is so obvious that we have to find our herd. And it does. I don't care if you're the right herd or the left herd or what, but it reminds me of cows. I live out in Montana. And one cow will start to walk in a general direction just because. And then another cow will stop eating and look up at that cow and be like, okay, that cow's going somewhere. I need to follow that cow. So that cow takes off. And then the rest of the cows are just watching these other two cows walk somewhere. And it's the nature of cows to be like, well, they got to know where they're going. And so they stop eating and just follow the lead cow. They could be going nowhere. They don't know where they're going. They saw that the herd started to move and they just take off. And we've become that way, at least in the United States. Where's the strongest voice? Who can we follow? I mean, we are heiferland out here. And the COVID-19 virus, which again, it goes back to the DNA issue, that's bat DNA and animal DNA, was getting back into us and saying, look, I know that you're mammals. I know you're pack animals. I know that pack animal instinct is pretty huge, but you aren't herd animals. So can you start to think for yourself a little bit here? And if the herd wants to go in one direction, why don't you decide if that's right for you or not? And instead of having to push back on the herd in a way that would seem like you're angry or make enemies, because that's what we do, right? I mean, if we don't want to do something that the herd is doing, a lot of times we have to build up the courage to break away from the herd. Think about this. It's a true deal. How many times have you waited till you got mad enough at somebody to leave a relationship? Or mad enough at your family to leave a dysfunctional communication with a group that is dysfunctional? How many times? We literally use anger as a way to tamp down grief, hesitation, fear, any of the big feels. We'll use anger as the temporary anesthetization to make that next step in our life. So what would happen if we just didn't use anger? I mean, think about this. What would happen if we stopped using anger as our main fulcrum? We just stopped. And instead, we used some form of acceptance. Now, this is going to challenge each and every one of us. And I'll use myself as an example. It is hard for Danielle Egnew, the Italian Scot, who apparently I have a little Danish in there too. That's odd. But anyway, it is hard for me to not have an opinion about people not observing a quarantine when the rest of us have all been shut into our houses and trying to do our best to flatten a curve. It is hard for me to not form a negative opinion and feel like someone else is super selfish who doesn't care in my mind, right? That's my motivation I assign to them. They must not care, right? So that's hard for me. So I'm challenging myself on this too. I'm not saying I'm not going to have my own emotional reaction. Yet I have been stepping into more of that, wow, I just have to accept. I don't have to, yet it's in my best interest to accept that this individual that I'm observing, who thinks that this is all a hoax and doesn't care and is walking right up to people and spitting on them as they talk and everything else, I can back away from them, yet it's to my best interest to recognize and acknowledge that that person is who they are and they're going to do what they're going to do. Now, I can say something to them if I really get a wild hair up my butt, and I can say, hey, man, we're all in the Costco together. Could you please step back? Now, I need to be prepared and accept that person's answer, which is probably, hey, F you, lady, mind your own business. It's a free country, which is actually a real story that happened. So that's why I can tell it. However, I've got to be able to accept that that's that person's lens, because what am I going to do? Start a fist fight with them because they are not accepting my lens? And this becomes really difficult. Now, obviously, gang, obviously, we're not going to stand there and watch somebody get gang raped. We're not just going to stand there while somebody's beaten to death. There are exceptions. I am talking about consciousness, and I am talking about when we see people do things that we wouldn't do. I literally, after I got told to F off, I laughed under my mask and I said, dude, you do you. You do you. And the guy looks at me, he goes, well, thank you, but I don't need your permission. He was just an owly weirdo. However, I don't know what I was thinking, even bothering saying something to that individual, because I could tell by feeling that person that they were going to tell me to stick it up my nose. I mean, I could tell, but I just couldn't stand it. I just couldn't stand it. And, for whatever reason, maybe the fear in me came up and I thought, dude, if I could loan you my binoculars and you could look down to October, you might have a differing opinion about how important this is. Or I could loan that person my binoculars and they might look down that and say, this is all crap. None of that's real. You're full of fear. So, obviously it was some weird fear response in me that had me even saying that when I knew better. I'm like, this guy's going to tell you to F off. And he sure did. So the importance of letting people do them, it doesn't mean you accept it. It means you accept that, guess what? You're not going to make a whole lot of difference there. And if you feel the need to say something to somebody, just remember how irritating it is when somebody says something to you. I was walking through a grocery store and I had my mask on. And it's something about dudes, man. I don't know. I think dudes react to fear very differently and they get very confrontational. And there was this younger guy behind me in line, he and another guy, and they were laughing and standing about 2 feet from each other. They're probably family or best friends or something. They've been spitting on each other anyway, so whatever. And the guy says to me, he's like, oh, he goes, so you think that's going to protect you from the fake virus? Are you protected from the fake virus? And I looked at him and I said, I just to F with him, because I thought, what a rude thing to say. And in that nanosecond, I thought, God, that must be what it's like if I'm saying to somebody, hey, you're infecting the rest of us. They're going to look at you like, whatever. Even though in this regard, I can still think I'm right, but we're talking about individual lenses here, okay? So, this guy says this to me. He's like, oh, are you going to keep yourself protected from your fake virus? And I looked at him and I said, how do you know I'm even real, dude? I could be a government hologram here to instill fear in you. And maybe you're the one that's afraid. And it took a second. He just looked at me like, is she crazy? Wait, what? There's holograms? And I watched his mind just go flick, 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 flick. And his buddy got it that I was just poking him with the stick. And his buddy started laughing. And the guy was like, oh, shut up, man. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And it kind of diffused the situation. However, do your best to do what's right for you during this time frame. Please social distance. I will tell you my opinion. You get to do what's right for you. Please continue to social distance even after we open up. Because the other thing we haven't covered yet is, though coronavirus is harder to spread in the summer because of the humidity and the heat, and it does kill it off. In areas that have a lot of mosquitoes, gang, it's in the same way that malaria is transmitted. When mosquitoes bite you and they go bite somebody else, guess what they're going to be spreading? So, this, not to make everybody crazy paranoid, yet it's just going to be part of how Mother Nature continues to thin out populations. And again, I had somebody asking me saying, well, would you be willing to go on record and, predict death numbers? And absolutely not. That's morbid as F. I almost dropped the F-bomb. That is morbid as hell. And I'm not going to do that. I will just tell you that we're not done with this virus yet. And if we can actually get into a place of being compassionate with one another, then it's going to make this process easier. And the more we confront each other and the more we get nasty, then I will tell you, the people who are enacting their fear by being defiant will be 50,000 times more defiant. Okay? Now, you do need to express your own, you do you, yet when somebody's doing them and that kind of spills over into your little compartment a little too much, then obviously you need to say something. Case in point. So my wife goes to Lowe's and she's working on her exercise studio because whenever she opens, we move locations and she wants it to be awesome, right? So she's fixing up a few things and she has not been out shopping for things like studio upgrades or whatever during this pandemic because that's not an essential trip. But since they opened up this state, she's out there more doing this, shopping, right? So as she's out there, she goes out to Lowe's and there's a guy and he's got his mask on and his gloves and he's wearing a button that said social distancing, 6 feet, the whole thing, right? And so this guy, as she's asking questions, he keeps walking up to her just 2 and 3 feet away. So she backs up to 6 feet. And as she backs up, she's wearing her mask. He walks up to her 2 and 3 feet. This happens 3 times. And my Scot wife, she's American, but she's of Scot lineage. Rebecca finally just had it. She's a Taurus too, with a lot of Capricorn in her chart. And she just took like a step back and she goes, Jesus effing Christ, dude, 6 feet. And she pointed at his button. And he took like a half a step back and she stepped back. And it's what it took to shake him out of that that automatic habit of walking up to someone. And I found this really interesting. I found this interesting as I've been social distancing. And fellas, I would love to hear your take on this. I know tons of great fellas out there who are social distancing and keeping their 6-foot margins and all this. Yet the only people that have really come into my space, like purposefully, not like if you're like, oh God, we're all smushed together and we're going to hold our breath and run through this 3-foot window that we all have because we have no other choice kind of thing. However, the only persons that I've had who have deliberately walked right into my space have been male. And I don't know if that's just a culturally ingrained thing because I'm female and I'm not threatening to them or whatever. I don't know. And actually, it's been white males who have just walked right up to me. And I'm like, excuse me. And I'll take a few steps back. And then they're really irritated if I say something, like they're embarrassed, But there's something really fascinating. I don't know if it's the masculine need to protect. So these fellas step closer as they're talking. And again, I know lots of white men who social distance, so don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it's been really wild to watch this sociologically, right? And I was out at the grocery store a while back, and I was waiting in a line, and this guy, and he had a mask on and whatnot, but he kept like edging up to me, and I finally moved, and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep the 6 feet. And he was like, oh, yeah, okay. And he backed up. And there was a guy behind him who looked like he was a mix of African American and Native American, which is not uncommon up here. And he was standing back at his line, and he just looked at me. You could tell he was smiling under his mask, and he just shook his head. So he was recognizing a dynamic there of, I don't know what that was. And I'm not hacking on white men today, for God's sakes. I'm just saying, culturally, we are being shown some really interesting facts about our society. And I find this so interesting because again, going back to the protests, and I'm not saying there was no ethnic people in those protests in Wisconsin and Minnesota and whatnot, yet to see this and see so many white people, I just thought, oh my goodness, we almost got through the lesson of coronavirus. We almost got through it the first time. And then we caved in under privilege and fear. And so we're going to get to do it again. So when we have those moments where we want to war against our neighbors, because they're not doing something they should be doing, and according to public health stipulations is what I'm saying. Obviously, unless somebody's really doing something obnoxious and you have to call the cops, dude, you do you, okay? You do you. Because really, all of a sudden, that's an energy that puts someone's words or actions right back on them. And you do you is go ahead and say what you want to me, but I'm not really affected by that. I don't need to fall in line like the, cow. I don't need to become part of the herd where the alpha has banged its chest, whether it's male or female. And now I have to fall behind this and be shamed by, no. So if you can try on you do you, it's really going to make more sense in the days to come. Because in our days to come, we're going to see some things that I was talking about back in 2017 and 2018 come to pass. We're going to see food shortages and water shortages and resource shortages. We're already seeing food shortages. There were over 700,000 pigs euthanized as well as pig fetuses aborted. Because with the restaurants shut down, these pork farmers have nowhere to send the pigs. And, before we all get up in arms, and those of us who love animals get our pitchforks and our torches and say, how could they do this? We have starving people in the world. How could they? It's important to note that real farmers abhor killing and wasting these animals. I mean, real farmers, I could never be a farmer. Real farmers are stewards of these animals. Now, of course, there's always slaughterhouses and all these things. However, most of these people that were having to kill their pig flocks, they're smaller producers. And when I read about these pigs being injected so that they would throw their litters and these would just be aborted dead baby pigs, and then they ground them all into fertilizer. And if that's not Soylent Green, I don't know. But I was just like, oh, my heart, I was sick about that. And then reading about the millions of chickens that were gassed to kill them because nobody's buying up all the chicken. Nobody's buying the eggs. Eggs are super expensive right now. They're going to keep going up. And so we're having to evaluate, how do we treat the creatures in our food chain? What are we doing with these creatures in our food chain? What kind of lives are they living? I mean, the beef industry right now is struggling. And, there's a lot of politics around this and a lot of opinions. Yet I know ranchers who are not raising meat, in a gross stockyard and mistreating their cows. I mean, it's not all about the mistreatment of the animals. Sometimes people do that. Most of these producers care about the animals. They're farmers, yes, they're selling them for meat and all that. Like I said, I couldn't be a farmer. Yet they're just sick. They're sick in their spirits. They're sick in their minds. They're sick in their bones that they're killing these animals. And, my wife said, well, I don't understand. Why don't the pork producers just kill the pigs and butcher them and freeze them and have them frozen? And I said, honey, because, I have agricultural people in my family. And I said, honey, because they don't have the money to butcher the pigs. And a lot of the packing plants that handle the pigs are closed because of COVID-19. So what are these guys going to do? Like take these pigs and shoot them in the head, then get out there with their kitchen knives and cut them apart and throw them in Ziploc bags? We're talking thousands of animals. And that's why there are industrial packing plants. And again, this is super gross when you think about how meat is treated. Yet, a lot of people don't have the money to process the meat. They have enough money to raise the meat and sell it. But the processing of the meat is a whole different thing. So, it's just a terrible, terrible tragedy all the way around. And the same with the chickens. What are you going to do? Chickens have a weird, short little life cycle. And if you have a chicken that's like 8 years old, it's tough as a rock. So, what do? It costs money to feed the chickens and to upkeep the chickens. And there's nowhere to send the chickens. And pretty soon you've got like a hobby farm with 1 million chickens on it that you're just feeding. And I know it's very easy for somebody like me who's an animal bleeding heart to say, well, I would just feed them and hope for the best. But you have to understand, gang, when a farmer is euthanizing these animals, they're not going, oh, well, bummer, I can't turn a buck. This is destroying those people, okay? So when you read about this, it's horrifying. And I've really taken to not eating a lot of pork anyway, just because pigs are super, super smart. I do struggle with eating bacon. I love bacon. However, outside of that, I don't have pork roasts or pork chops, there's something about eating a pig that makes me feel like I'm eating a person. Except for bacon, which grows on a bacon tree and is really good on chocolate sundaes, right? So that's some twisted thing in my head. But anyway, I'm not saying I'm not a touch twisted. So when we look at how this is affecting our food chain, I was talking about by the time we're hitting 2020, 2021, 2022, we were going to see food shortages. And that's also, this is meat stuff. Wait till we start hearing about crop issues because everything backs up. It's a supply chain issue. So, as we go into these summer months, and I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, I honest to God, care about you enough to give you a heads up. If you get a chance, I'm not saying we'll have no food, of course, we're America. We'll always have something. However, I will tell you, if you can throw a couple of tomato plants in a pot and maybe just get a little window box and put some lettuce in it and maybe just some herbs. And, if you want to do, cucumbers are harder because they grow in vines, so you need a little more space for that. But beans grow up. If you have, all you have is a balcony and you can just put some planter boxes and put some trellises in, the beans will grow up and you can pick them. You'll at least have some vegetables as we come into this time frame that's going to make food really expensive. And it's not just about us. A lot of our wheat crops go to China. And I don't have time at the end of this podcast to really get into this, except to tell you that we are literally sitting in a position right now where we're going to watch systems fail. So when systems fail and people's life, their world is threatened, what do? They get fearful. And we talked about that for the whole podcast. So let's work on the you do you. Okay. It is a nice diffusing point for people. You do you, man. It's not judgy. It disconnects the energy immediately of a confrontation. And it allows us to go on in a modality that we feel is correct for us. Again, always call the police if there's craziness happening. Yet, just let's not get into camps and proselytize. And can we please come out of the habit of being a herd? We're not a herd animal. We act like a herd animal. We are a pack animal. We're a group animal, like apes. Apes are a pod of whales. Well, we're not quite a herd animal. We just like to act like that. So, gang, I do want to just make note, if you've been hearing banging or barking or anything in the background on this podcast, I am at home in my home studio to record this. Because all of business is not open. And our house is being re-roofed right now. So you might hear some banging or clacking in the background, and that's just life happening. That's how you know it's recorded live. So our dog barking here or there at the folks roofing. So just remember, gang, you do you, and let's literally lead with love. Let's lead with positivity. Let's lead with some examples of what it is to share and to sustain ourselves for part of our food, and a lot of people aren't going on big vacations this summer, so we can do more gardening. My wife and I love to garden. We didn't plant a garden for a couple of summers because we were traveling a lot. But, a lot of us are going to be here. So just think about this. You do you. I'm going to do me. You want to keep going to the grocery store? You do you. Whatever. I love you all, and I will see you next podcast.